The presence of a Jewish chaplain in the military is far more than just being a rabbi to the Jewish men and women and children who have some relationship to the armed forces, right? It's being the representative of the Jewish community to the non-Jewish world and to the military world. And when I used to speak to yeshiva students about chaplaincy as a viable option for career, I used to say that if not a single Jewish soldier served in the army, there would be a rationale for Jewish chaplains serving in the army. You become the Jewish presence to an overwhelmingly large Christian and today Muslim military. Okay, that was an unplanned thing. Now, the format that I'd like to use is to show you some slides, and the slides will be the basis for several talking points, and then I'll spend a few minutes, hopefully, talking about the process that I used to write the book. And I must start out really by saying that one of the people I have to give tremendous credit to is Rabbi Quint, because the thing that really pushed me into sitting down and actually doing it was, we were having a dinner at a Sudat Hodaya at a hotel, and we were talking about books, and I said, well, I've been wanting to write my memoirs for years, but I haven't sat down to do it. I have to get a computer. And he said, I have an old computer that I'm not using, and it's yours to use. It was a 286 computer, and I got it, and that really was the germ that actually had me sit down and start writing. Okay, so let me start. By the way, if I could ask somebody to just, Harold, there are two switches right outside of this door, please. The top two, I believe, will turn the lights out. And I'll just talk through some of these slides quickly. And I'm very happy to have several of my grandchildren here today. Okay, now, these will be triggering points for me. This one, as you can see, are a bunch of children in Purim costumes with a fellow that certainly doesn't look like he's serving in the military. This was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. This was obviously Purim, and I used to invite Lubavitch students from Morristown, New Jersey, to come and help create an atmosphere on Purim. I'm going through these quickly because I want to, and by the way, some of you may recognize some people here. If any of you are from Teaneck, I don't know if anybody here is from Teaneck, Dr. Mel Haller in the back. He was is an Orthodox fellow, and I'll talk about how one gets around dealing with halakhic issues. Okay, that is me in the days when the Army controlled my weight. That's me. Interestingly, when these young students would come from Morristown, the Rabbi would always put out the word that after the Kriyat HaMegillah and whatever festivities we had, the driver was not permitted to drink, and the deputy driver was permitted to drink only 2 drinks. Okay, now that's really the end stages of building a sukkah. This was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. More importantly, I'm explaining to a soldier some of the requirements and the halachot of sukkah, and there'll be a little bit more about that in a while. Now, this isn't really very significant, except to say that one of the things that I tried to do as a Jewish chaplain was to create an atmosphere within the military, although unique, to kind of replicate some of the things that a soldier might experience at home in a congregation. Every shul in America has some kind of a gift shop. This was a different kind of a gift shop in that we made things available without any profit factor. Oh, thank you, Sherry. I'll just leave it over here. So that soldiers could avail themselves of various items that they might need. Now, in terms of the routine items that a soldier needed for religious and educational purposes, the Army provided most of the basic necessities. Chaplains oftentimes got very upset when they were asked to do administrative work in the Army, because all of us, in addition to serving our own communities, our Jewish communities, had additional responsibilities. And I became somewhat of an administrative specialist. And I learned early on that if you were the administrative specialist, you usually were able to find access to greater funding. So books for education, books for soldiers just to read, thousands of dollars of svarim, of religious objects, were made available through United States government funding. Now, this is just, some of you may have taken a cruise in Panama. This is just preliminary to talking a little bit about Panama and the canal zone. Those locks are operated, or those gates, which weigh 250 tons apiece, are operated with a 50 horsepower motor. And ships are raised and lowered on one side a total of 85 feet from sea level. And that's a fairly large ship going through there. That may be a familiar face to a couple of you here. It's Rabbi Maurice Lamb. One of the things we tried to do in various places in the Army was to run workshops. And we got funding from the Army to pay for scholars and residents to come down. When they came overseas, they were paid on the basis of an equivalent rank, or treated on the basis of an equivalent rank as a two-star general. And so he came down, in essence, as a two-star general. Gave him VIP quarters, VIP travel, and I tried to give him VIP service, and he did great in terms of the programs that he presented to soldiers and families. The only thing that came out negative on one of his visits was that I took him to the airport and came home, and I got a frantic call that I had forgotten to get him an exit visa from Panama, and they weren't letting him leave the country. In any case, he was doing something there that only the most VIPs were able to do, and that was actually operating the gates of the Panama Canal locks. And it's as simple as just turning a handle to get the gates to open or close, turn another handle and the water comes in and the water comes out. Okay, that fellow you might recognize on the left. This is a posed picture, obviously. He's now my dentist. And in any case, I show this picture for several reasons. The Aron Kodesh, there was no Aron Kodesh on the Army bases in the Canal Zone. When we came there, this Aron Kodesh was designed by someone and built using United States government funds. Again, knowing how to do it really was very significant. I'll tell you a story about a kosher kitchen. On my last assignment, or next to the last assignment at Fort Dix, New Jersey, there was no longer a kosher kitchen there. Kosher kitchen meaning a kitchen that soldiers could come into and prepare food. A kitchen that we could use for an Oneg Shabbat, for a Kiddush, for a Sudat Shabbat. And I spoke to the comptroller of Fort Dix, a senior colonel, and I said, I'd like to get some funding for a kosher kitchen. Here's where administrative acumen came into play. He said, write me a paper. He says, certainly it will probably not be programmed into the following year's budget. These things take a year's lead time, etc. So I wrote him a 1-page and 5-line document outlining the requirement and telling him why it was needed, what kashrus was all about. And he called me up. He says, I really appreciated the paper. It was short, and I rarely get a short paper. I waited a few months. This is after he told me that it'd be a year and a half. And I got a phone call from the engineers about 2 months before Pesach. We want to come and look at the chapel facility. This was a 600-seat facility that we shared with Protestant and Catholic chaplains. And these chapels were designed so that they could be without any religious symbols, and when each group used the chapel, it became a shul. There was an Aron Kodesh on tracks that was wheeled out. And the engineers came in. I said, what are you doing, a cost estimate for a year and a half from now? He said, no, we're coming in to actually do the final designs on the kitchen. I said, how did that happen? And I called the comptroller up. He said he liked the paper so much that he found money in the current year's budget. I said, well, how soon do you think the kitchen will be done? He said, I'm going to try to have it done for you by Pesach. And if you know what it's like to get a government contract through for various and sundry things. But I had made friends with many of the people in purchasing and contracting and got permission to hand carry the purchase request to the various vendors, got Army transportation, and by Pesach, we had the finest kitchen of any kitchen in any chapel. In any case, now this is a beautiful drawing. I have the original done by a soldier. And here's another thing we tried to do. We tried to take what we could that a soldier had in terms of talents and use those talents to bring out Judaism. He did this drawing by putting a pen down on a piece of paper and never picked it up from the paper until he was finished. Right? I'm not going to tell you yet where that's hanging or where that was hanging. Obviously, the Declaration of Independence of Israel, of the State of Israel, it's hanging where it should have been hanging then, in what I think might have been the only air-conditioned sukkah in the world. Now, how did that come about? I asked that the engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers, build the sukkah near our house, which was about 1.5 blocks or 2 blocks from the chapel. This way the whole community could use it, and we would then be able to eat in the sukkah without any difficulty. You notice it has a tarp over it. It was the rainy season, and so we kept it covered when it was not in use. The 220 line was put in by the engineers. We happened to have had a Catholic chaplain there who was half Lebanese and half Italian, who had an air conditioner in his office. And I convinced him to let me borrow the air conditioner for 10 days, and so we had the air-conditioned sukkah. Now, the sukkah was stored in a warehouse that he had access to. We had it built, prefabbed in sections, and when it came time to put it up the following year, half of the sukkah was gone. And then I realized that he had put a new vestibule on his chapel. Right? And I went over to him, I said, "Woody, did you by any chance know what happened to half of my sukkah?" He says, "I'll speak to the engineers," and so the other half was put up. But that was the air-conditioned sukkah. Now, I mentioned the canal before. When people would come and visit, the line was, "Have you seen the lox?" I said, "I've seen the lox, but I've not seen the bagels," because in Panama there were no bagels. And I decided that I wanted to have a bagels and lox brunch one Sunday morning. We used to have a Sunday school at the Jewish Welfare Board facility there. So I gave a recipe for water bagels to 10 women. Now the problem is that with water bagels, they'll either come out very nicely or they'll come out so shriveled and so hard that you can't eat them. And that's exactly what happened on this test batch. So I knew that I had a problem when we had less than a dozen edible bagels and a reservation list that started at about 25 people. And as the list grew, I panicked more and more. I got a hold of the chief of navigation of the Panama Canal, a Captain Harry Galland, who was Jewish, who happened to have been in New York on temporary duty. Now the chief of navigation controls every vessel of any kind, including a human being who wants to swim the length of the canal. I said, "Harry, you got to put 12 dozen bagels on the first ship out of New York." He said, "All right, it's taken care of." I said, "And give instructions to the captain of the ship that he will not be able to transit the canal unless he notifies me when he arrives on the Atlantic side of the isthmus, and my office was on the Pacific side." So he said, "That'll be taken care of." I then saw the list go up of attendees, and I got a hold of the richest man in Panama, who had the largest operation in the free zone. And I said, "Sam, is there any possibility you can get me 20 dozen bagels out of Miami?" He had operations in Miami. He said, "No problem." So just to kind of make sure that we had some redundancy, I got a hold of Rabbi Nathan Witkin, alav shalom, who had been the rabbi in the Canal Zone for some 35 years, and he was now a chaplain at the Houston Medical Center. I said, "Can you get me 20 dozen bagels from Houston?" And I told all of these people to label them as religious bread so that when they came into customs, I would have no problem. In the end, we had 175 people, and we had 52 dozen bagels. So that was known as Operation Bagel. It's a short chapter in the book. Now, we're shifting focus. This is the cover picture on the book. That is me, believe it or not. That, if I'm not mistaken, was taken in Korea. There was a Jewish battalion commander, a tank battalion commander, and one of the things that an effective chaplain has to do is to learn the environment in which his soldiers live and work. So I decided that when I had my first assignment at Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is the headquarters of the armor, I was going to learn how to drive a tank, and I was going to learn how to fire a tank. And did you know that tanks have nautical terms? That the bow is the front of the tank and the back of the tank is known as the stern? And the reason for that is very interesting. It was demonstrated when I learned how to drive. The tank commander put a young trainee, who happened to have been black, in as the driver. And as we got to a little ravine that was filled with water, he told the driver to give it gas. And when you give it gas going down into the ravine, the water comes tearing